And the Ayatollah tells Jimmy Carter that if Jimmy Carter lets him take over Iran, then he won't side with the Soviets and he'll keep relations with America the same. Jimmy Carter is so naive, he says, okay. So he pressures the Shah to leave in 1979, orders our military to stop supporting the Iranian pro-American military, and the Ayatollah lands his plane, comes out, and he gathers all the pro-American generals, brings them to the top of a high school and kills them, hunts down all the pro-Shah, pro-America people and kills them.
Welcome to the American Story Podcast. Today we are doing something a little different. We have a new episode that was not the one we planned on airing this week, but there's a lot happening right now with America and Iran and Israel. There's a lot of conversations. And as I was thinking, who are the people that probably can help us navigate this? There were several names that came to mind, but the two favorites that I thought of, who also were very willing and gracious to jump on with me kind of impromptu to have this conversation, is another father-son duo, spends time in American history. You know them, Bill and Michael Federer. Bill and Michael, thanks for being with us today.
Hey, Tim, great to be with you.
Great to be with you, Tim. Happy to be here.
Well, so guys, normally on the podcast, we spend time getting to know people, getting to hear their story, which of course I actually do want to do a little bit. I want people to hear kind of, Bill, how you got started and what God has done. And Michael, you jumping along and as the son of a father-son duo, we kind of understand and can have some great conversations, but also both of us have been blessed having amazing fathers that were trailblazers in very unique ways. And so we definitely want to get into that story, but also there's a lot of things happening with Iran that there's some important historic context a lot of people don't know and understand. And I think it makes a difference even as Christians as we try to understand how do we apply the Bible in some of these areas. Where did like this, in biblical prophecy, does this line up somewhere? What does this mean? And then the connection with Israel. And of course, there's been a lot of scrutiny around America's involvement with Israel. So much going on that you guys can give such good historic context to. But before we get there, I do want people to get to know you just a little bit. So, Bill, I know you as the American Minute guy, that I would get your emails and read them virtually every day when they would come in. I was very blessed to share the stage with you many years ago, maybe a decade plus ago now. It was so fun getting to listen to someone so brilliant. And I think many people have seen some of that aspect from you. Some people know that you actually traveled with Charlie Kirk, that y'all did a lot of things together. Michael, of course, you were there too. But Bill, I think there's probably a lot of people that don't know how this all started for you. So will you take maybe a couple minutes and walk us through part of your story? How did you become the American Minute history guy?
Well, years ago, probably around the same time that your dad wrote the book Myth of Separation. I was collecting God and Country quotes, and Marshall Foster, who since passed away, would come and speak at the church where we were at. And so for years, I was teaching a Bible class, and I was collecting God and Country quotes, and I had a 386 computer. This is before the internet. And I started collecting quotes and printing them out and passing them out to the Bible class. My degree's in accounting, so I like things that are detailed, so I would save all the endnotes. And after 4 years, got it printed just in time for the Republican National State Convention in Texas, and sold a half, thousands of copies that first time, and then it took off from there. Focus on the Family picked it up and sold hundreds of thousands, and then that sort of opened the door for me to transition full-time to writing books. So I've written about 30 books. The one on Islam is interesting. So
and just a footnote to that. I remember being a young boy in his office. This was before you could just type something in on Google. He had stacks of books. I mean, you look at the bibliography for this first book, the Encyclopedia of Quotations. This was no small effort. My father will breeze past it, but this was quite an undertaking. I think at one point my mother basically threatened to toss the computer into the creek behind our house because he was spending so much time on it. But that book has been used on the floor of Congress regularly, cited in a Supreme Court decision. So God knew what he was doing when he tasked my father with this, and bringing it up to speed.
Well, and I can say too, I mean, this is where we have, Michael, you and I have talked some. We have some unique perspective on this because we grew up seeing some of what our dads went through and the labor intensive realities that they were navigating. And especially, Bill, when you're compiling this, and there's no internet. I mean, today, people don't even know, right? The rising generation, they talk to some AI, they type in their AI, and AI gives them an answer, whether it's correct or not. That's a different conversation. Maybe we'll get to it. But the reality is, back in the day, you had to do some extensive work to track down those quotes, to be able to footnote it, to document all of those. And so even as you mentioned, you've written now 30 books. You didn't just write 30 books because you had a creative idea, right? You're not a fiction writer. You are a history writer and you are a storyteller of historic events. So, Michael, to your point, your dad has put in astounding amounts of effort and labor to be able to honestly and accurately tell these stories. And Bill, you mentioned your book, What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran, and I definitely want to talk about that in a little bit. That is a book that I now know so many pastors who are encouraging everybody needs to get this book, read it, understand it, because they're also in America, not just now conversations with Iran and Israel. There's a lot of conversations about the Islamization of America, which we might come to that in a minute because I don't want to derail us from where we're going, but your book is one of the best guides on some of that. So we will make sure everybody knows what that is. But Bill, let's back up. So you just said like you wrote 30 books. What led you to go from the God and Country quotes that there's a lot more stories that need to be told, or maybe a lot more information that people don't know? What led you to start writing so many books?
Well, it was funny you bring back memories. I remember going to the North Texas State University, and they actually had books, from the 1600s. And of course, you've got those books in your library. You and your father, you have one of those extensive libraries. And of course, the American Journey Experience has those books. But for me, just to hold a book from the 1600s in my hand, and then they even let me check out of the library a book from the 1700s, the Massachusetts Blue Laws, where they actually had the scripture verse after the law. And I felt like I had some hidden treasure. And I was like, is somebody going to chase me into the parking lot to get it back? It's like I took it home. Anyway, and then some of the libraries I went to had like climate controlled, and they wouldn't let you like touch the pages. We moved back to St. Louis. I ran for Congress, didn't win, but came close. That's a whole nother story. And then Keith Ellison made the news by being the first congressman to swear into Congress with his hand upon a Quran. Lo and behold, it was Thomas Jefferson's Quran. And the news media said this was wonderful. Jefferson must have loved Islam. They pushed it so hard that I was at one church and they said, well, didn't Jefferson swear in on a Quran? I'm like, and as you know, Jefferson fought the Muslim Barbary pirate wars. And so we had a Quran to figure out what's in this book that makes them want to attack us when we didn't do anything wrong. And one of the quotes, he's over in France as an ambassador. He's meeting with the Muslim ambassador from Tripoli, Abdurrahman, and he's asking him, what did we do to offend you? And he said, no, it's just written in the Quran that every nation that does not acknowledge Islam's authority were sinners, and it was a right and duty to make them slaves, and every Muslim who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise. Anyway, I compiled this, and that's this book, What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran.
It looks like he's ready to get right to the topic at hand. So I just want to say quickly, Tim, yes, you and I have seen the sacrifices that both of our fathers have made to bring this accurate history to the forefront. And I'm obviously very proud of him. I'm so excited to be doing more with you and your father. You guys you're kind of like legends in my mind. So I just want your audience to hear this quick little anecdote. So as I start to rejoin ministry, it's like in an action movie when you hear about the protagonists and all these accomplishments they've done before you're ever introduced to them, I start hearing this name, Tim Barton, hearing all these incredible things. And then I finally meet you, and you know what, Tim, you're not only everything that they said and more, but you're genuine, you're kind, you're encouraging. So I just wanted to take a quick moment to say thank you for what you're doing. You really are, between us, I like to say, history's back, baby. And it takes, you have to tell the story in an exciting way to do that. So I think you're doing that really well. And we're both doing what we can to carry on our Father's message. So now we've at least put a little bit of that in a package. We can dive into this topic at hand, or wherever you'd like to go next with this.
Yeah, I remember I first met Charlie Kirk in 2014 when I spoke at a civic center in Robinson, Illinois, and he was 19 years old. He was the warm-up speaker for me. And so we got to be friends. Foster Fries was a mutual friend, supported me when I ran for Congress. And anyway, he would text me questions. And I remember I texted him, I said, I'm thrilled that you're, getting into the realm of history. And there's somebody that you're going to come across named Tim Barton. And I want you to know he is tremendous, and you need to receive from him. And I texted that to Charlie, and he thanked me for it. But you've been a tremendous champion, and we just thank God for you, Tim.
Well, you guys are so kind. I mean, y'all know I love and appreciate you guys so much, and I would love to spend more time just boasting on each other. But obviously, the audience probably would rather us get into a more relevant conversation for them. But I do want to point out, guys, one of the cool things that I think for WallBuilders, the American Minute, I think is encouraging for a lot of people. Michael, when you and I get experience this some, but we see at times people go, your dad is so amazing. We love your dad so much. And one of the things that we hear is we are so grateful there's now somebody who's going to carry on that legacy, who's going to carry on that mantle. This morning at WallBuilders, our staff devos, we were in 2 Kings, and we actually read where Elijah leaves and Elisha picks up the mantle, gets the double portion of the anointing. And I think maybe it's even providential that we're having a conversation right after we read this Elijah-Elisha story, because one of the things, guys, that certainly I hear a lot is how encouraged people are that the incredible work, Bill, that you have done is not stopping when the Lord calls you home. Because Michael, as you're stepping into that, and now you and your dad have already written a book together, you're doing so much more. We're so excited for that. So with that being said, knowing that both of you are students of history, one of the things, guys, that when we look at what happened very recently with America navigating with Iran and the bombs that were dropped and Iran responding, and now there's a lot of escalation going on. We can get to that in a moment, but one of the things I saw on social media that I thought was so fun, somebody posted a video where they were talking about being able to find things from Queen Esther and Mordecai in Iran. And I think a lot of Christians would go, wait a second, how did Esther end up in Iran? So Bill and Michael, will you, before we get into maybe some of the geopolitics and some of the other thoughts, will you give us maybe a little historic background, even from a scriptural perspective? How did Esther end up in Iran? Can you tell us part of that story?
Well, Noah's grandson through Shem is Elam. And Elam founded the kingdom of Elam, which is Persia. And so that was around 3000 BC, called the Bronze Age. 1900 BC, Abraham fought a battle against the king of Elam, Chedorlaomer. And then you see this Persian empire that Elam becomes, conquers Assyria. The capital is Nineveh. Conquers Babylon, and then Cyrus of Persia around 538 BC is the one who lets the Jews go back and rebuild Jerusalem. Daniel is a prophet in the court of the king of Persia, right? That's Iran. Matter of fact, the 3 wise men that came to baby Jesus were from Persia. The word magi is a Persian word. It's the root word for magician, but it's also the root word for wise men and counselors to the king. And of course, they were into, they had their astronomy and astrology and all that, but they would look at prophecies. And so Daniel's the one who saw that Jeremiah had prophesied in 70 years the Jews were supposed to go back. And so he sets himself to fast and pray. But here, the school that Daniel started is into prophecies, and that would explain why these magi are coming, that, the prophecies of the Messiah. Of course, Herod says, I'm the king. What do you mean there's another baby king? And then he kills all the kids in Bethlehem. Then we have, so Persia is huge. 480 BC, it attacks Greece. And you have Xerxes, and you maybe saw that movie years ago with the Spartans and Leonidas and all that. The Greeks team up, the Athenians and the Spartans, and they drive the Persians out. Battle of Marathon, and of course the young runner runs 26.5 miles to tell the news that they won and drops dead. But you have these famous battles of Salamis, and so the Greeks push the Persians out, Iran, Persia out. And then the next century, one of the Greeks is Alexander the Great, and he not only defends Greece, he attacks into Persia and conquers it. And around 333 BC.
So let me pause for a second, because you're giving so many gold nuggets. I don't want people to miss this. So already, let's back up. So Iran is Persia, because I think sometimes when we learn Bible stories, sometimes the Bible maps, even in our own head, they don't often overlap with the current kingdoms today, the current nations today. And so as we read these stories, like you just mentioned Daniel, which it's such a fun, almost like a mic drop moment. Hey, where did the Magi that came to bring gifts to baby Jesus, the gold, the frankincense, and myrrh, where did they come from? Oh yeah, they came from the school that Daniel started, and Daniel prophesied about, right, in theory, this future Messiah who's coming. And so these, and I'm saying in theory because theoretically, these magi, who are now generations later, they have learned in this school about the prophecy of a coming Messiah, and they see the star and they're like, this has got to be it. So the magi are connected literally to Daniel, which goes all the way back. And again, this is Persia, but this is where Iran is. And also, as you mentioned, the battle with Xerxes, which happens a generation or two later, that's where Esther is from in that kingdom. And so when Iran fell, and there were people that were able to get on their phones and go in and take videos of places that had been honestly closed off. I think the date I saw was since 1979. Some of these places have not been open to the public. And somebody walks through and they're showing evidence of the names of like Esther and Mordecai in the records from Iran, because Iran used to be Persia. And there's so many biblical connections to this. And today, most people have no idea what those connections are, which is, again, it's why I love talking to Bill and Michael Federer, because you guys do such a good job unpacking these bags. And Bill, you go so fast because you know it so well. Michael, sometimes I remember talking to my dad, and he would tell stories, and I was like, Dad, you got to slow down. You got to let people's brains have time to process what you just said, because they say so much. And Michael, I don't know if it's true for you, but for me, the more I learn, I get so excited. I just want to tell more and more stories, and now I speak really fast. And I'm like, I probably should. Michael, you might be the most mature of all the four of us, of the father-son duo. So maybe you don't have the problem. But for me,
I'm heading right down that path. And I've realized it's because with history, if you're trying to tell how you got from A to B, if you remove too many of the stories in the middle, it's a jump. So historians have to learn to talk fast so they can get through a few more stories so they can make it all connect. I'm learning quickly. So
it's so good. Okay, so we can now, Bill, let's jump back. So somehow really quickly, we got from Daniel, Xerxes, Leonidas, Alexander the Great. This is the best history class ever because it happens fast and I'm tracking with you. So we're at Alexander the Great. So please pick back up as our professor and walk us through this.
All right, so Alexander the Great dies around, he conquers Persia around 333 BC. and it's easy to remember, right? 333. 333 BC, Alexander the Great conquers Persia. He dies, and his kingdom's divided between his four generals, and Ptolemy takes Egypt, but Seleucid takes the Persian Empire. So it's called the Seleucid Empire, and we know it because Antiochus Epiphanes is this Seleucid king who tries to stamp out the Jews. He thinks they're a continual problem, and he's killing them, and they drive him out, and they celebrate it with Hanukkah, right? So they have the Maccabees, and they cleanse the temple, and they light the menorah, and it stays lit, for 8 days when they only had enough oil for one day. And so that's Hanukkah. And after Hanukkah, the kingdom of Judea, right? So it's the tribe of Judah. So it's called Judea, and we call the people that live there Jews. So the word Jews comes from the word Judah, because the other tribes have been scattered, and there's lots of speculations of where they went. But for 100 years, from the Maccabees, the Hanukkah, from 167 BC up until around 63 BC, Judah is its own independent kingdom again. And they have a war between the Pharisees and Sadducees. Pharisees are students of the law, and they believe everything. Jesus criticized them because they added on extra traditions and they didn't realize them. The Sadducees were ones that had kissed up to the Greeks, and they were political Jews. They controlled Jerusalem and the temple, but they didn't believe in miracles and eternal life and angels. And they actually got into a war so bad that they were killing each other. And now it's 63 BC, and there's a Roman general named Pompey, and he's up near the Black Sea, and they tell him there's a civil war in Judea, and he goes, perfect time to invade. The Pharisees side with the Roman general Pompey. They defeat the Sadducees. Pompey supposedly went into the temple, comes out and tells his men, don't touch this place. And so the Jews sort of like Pompey, but from that moment on, Judea is a Roman province. And the Romans increasingly take more of a role. And then, Herod gets recognized as the leader, and then all the taxes, and you have to count Mary and Joseph. But from Pompey on, since Judea used to be part of the Seleucid Persian Empire, it starts a war. So there's a 700-year war between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. And even after Rome becomes Christian with Constantine in 313 AD, now we're in the ADs, the war's still going on until the 600 AD. And the Christian Romans and the Persians fight it out so bad that they weaken each other. And into that power vacuum comes Islam. And so Islam would have never spread as fast as it did had not these two superpowers had weakened themselves.
Now from then, 632 to 732, there's 100-year conquest where, I mean, if you look at it on a map, it looks like spreading wildfire. And then obviously you've got the Crusades, but I'm trying to see what we can select that's going to bring us up to current and modern day. So Tim, you let us know how much of the ancient history we want to dig into here. But I want your audience to have some understanding of why this makes current events a little more understandable, a little more digestible. I just want to remind people right off the bat that, prior to the late 70s, prior to Jimmy Carter's administration, Iran was very, very Western. People said that it looked like it was a Beach Boys video. You had suit and ties, swimsuits, dresses. I mean, this
discos.
I think people, there's only so much history you keep in your head. Like you mentioned, when you're listening to speakers like our fathers, I remind them that the brain is like a sponge, and you can only saturate it so much. But we want this information. Basically, there's a long track record of war. How does this impact what we're seeing today?
Yeah, and so it's a great segue thought, because one of the things that you guys can express so well, Bill, you've documented this, Michael, you're now helping tell the story as well. there's a lot of misunderstanding historically, and that can shift our perspective to even biblical understanding, to the geopolitics of regions when you don't know some of the background details. And one of the things, obviously, that the American Minute, that WallBuilders, we try to do is a little bit like the Paul Harvey, that we tell the rest of the story so that you really understand kind of what's there. And so even as you're talking about the 100 years of conquest and the Crusades and the response to that, we don't have time to digress in this now, but I think it's worth just kind of highlighting as we talk about even some of the current Islamatization of America, of the states, and some are progressing different eras faster than others. But the reason it matters is so often we are told history from a perspective that is very anti-Christian in the American education academic system. And the reason I point this out is because so often Americans hear about the Crusades and how bad America, or how bad Christianity, not America, how bad Christianity was because of the Crusades, but no history book seems to talk about all of the jihads that were taking place.
Yeah.
That led to the, had there not been jihads, there would have been no Crusades.
Yeah, it was defensive posture. Yeah.
Right. As you mentioned, there was a power vacuum bill. So there's a lot going on, but all of this is background framework. So understand that there's a lot of, for all the listeners, there's a lot of biblical connection from not just Israel, which is certainly true, but even in Iran, which was Persia, and some of the Christian leaders that were there, like even this idea, saying the Christian leaders that were there might be a little misleading, because I don't know that we would argue Daniel was a Christian, but Daniel believed in God and it helped the nation recognize there was God, because after he was thrown in the den, the pit of lions, and he survives, the king's like, everybody's going to believe in God now. It's a new religion here in Persia. There was a shift that happens, similar what happens with Esther. And so there's a lot of things we can point to that then when you have the Magi come to bring gifts to Jesus, there are people that, again, they're not Christians because Jesus hadn't come yet. And so the Christians are known as the followers of Christ. I get all that. But there was a very strong God connection in Iran. And so as you track part of the history, which has a lot of biblical overlap in the real history of Iran, it's very different than the modern narrative we hear today. And so, you know, even catching up, Michael, to your point, when you look at Iran from back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, it looks like a state in the United States where they have freedom. It's very westernizing culture. And one of the things that certainly you guys have documented and told these stories very well is oftentimes what happens under the Islamification of a nation is not only does it remove some of the basic, what we would know as inalienable rights and those liberties, but you see there's a lot of oppression that comes with it. And not to over spiritualize this, but I want to say this, and then I want to let you guys expound on this. The Bible tells us that Jesus came that we may have life and have it more abundantly. The thief comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. That's what the devil does. Well, when you look at a lot of what happens, like, for example, the freedoms, the inalienable rights that people had, when Islam shows up, that there's a lot of, it seems like, steal, kill, and destroying happening of that culture, society, civilization, freedom, etc. Do you think I'm oversimplifying or reading too much into this, or does that make sense to you guys? Because, again, y'all study this. What's your take on that?
So my father can go through it in great detail, but the takeaways from studying Muhammad's life is that he is more than a religious leader. He is a religious as well as a political and a military leader. Now that, just understanding that alone is going to help you understand so much more about what we're contending with, why the Western world has to decide, is this ideology compatible, or is this, what, do they reject each other? You know, we use the analogy of magnets to illustrate a lot of things, but some magnets just will not touch. Some stick easily. But so as you kind of look through these conquests and you see Muhammad's life and how he was the perfect Muslim and how things are modeled after him, the imagery that I want our audience to have in the back of their minds as my father kind of goes into detail about this is checkers versus chess. Here in the United States, a lot of times we have this assumption that we can win a battle that we're in just by being reactive or maybe thinking one move ahead. However, when you look at an ideology that appears after Christianity is already established, you have to remember that people are playing chess on the checkerboard. They are thinking 4, 5, 6, 7 moves ahead. It's like if you're playing poker and you show your hand and then another ideology comes along centuries after that, it's like they could pick the deck to see what would defeat this hand on the table. So we just have to be aware that there's a lot that's been happening behind this book that is selling so much right now. This was published in 2007. My father was over the bullseye then, but that just shows you how much this threat has grown quietly. And now that there's a position of power, you're going to see this a lot more prominently. It's not hidden anymore. So.
Yeah, exactly. So what I do in the book is I go back to the DNA of Muhammad's life and how he was a religious leader for 12 years in the pagan city of Mecca, and he was illiterate. He could never read and write. He would go on camel rides with his uncle Abu Talib, and he'd hear about all the different religions, the Zoroastrians in Persia, that believed that paradise was filled full of virgins that would fulfill all the guy's desires, and that gets into his belief system. The pagans had a square building that housed 360 different idols. There were pagan gods, and the most popular was Hubal, the moon god. They had this rock they thought had fallen from the moon, and they'd kiss it and walk around it. And then the Jews, Muhammad originally had his followers bowing toward Jerusalem. And then the Christian faith, an Encyclopedia Britannica, said the gospel was made known to Muhammad through apocryphal and heretical sources. So he thought the Trinity was the Father, Mary, and Jesus. He goes into Mecca 610 AD, feels like there's something in it for everyone. Nobody likes it. He gets confrontational. They chase him out of town 622 AD. He goes north to a Jewish city called Medina. They're nice and let him in as an immigrant, the first ever Muslim immigrant. He goes into the minority neighborhoods and he organizes a following, so like a community organizer. And when he gets big enough, he gets involved in politics. And then he pressures the Jews to a treaty. And then now he's a political leader. When his followers get chased out of Mecca, he allows them to rob the caravans headed back, this victimhood thing. We're the victims. They were intolerant of us, so we're justified. And he gets verses from Allah that he gets a fifth of the booty from robbing caravans. And so he ends up fighting in 66 battles and raids, killing an estimated 3,000 people. And within 5 years of him coming into this Jewish city as an immigrant, there's not a Jew left in the city. So when Mandami 2 weeks ago said, oh, my religion started with Muhammad being an immigrant into the city of Medina. Yeah. And 5 years later, what a Jew left in the city because they were chased out, killed, or enslaved. Within 5 years of Muhammad's death, every pre-existing culture in Arabia was wiped out. And then, as my son said, they conquered Egypt, which used to be Christian, evangelized by Mark. They conquered Syria, which used to be Christian, evangelized by the Apostle Paul. They conquered Jerusalem. And the Byzantine Greek Orthodox bishop swung a deal that instead of it being convert or die, there was a third choice. You could be a demi-status and pay taxes to support your new Muslim master. And then they conquered North Africa, which used to be Christian. St. Augustine of Hippo was from Carthage, today is Tunisia. And then they crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, conquered Spain, held it for 700 years, and finally stopped outside of Paris, Battle of Tours, 732 AD, just 100 years after the death of Muhammad in 632 AD. And then they conquered East, and in 634, they conquered Persia.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Okay.
And you start to see that the definition of world peace is different in Islam. World peace with us is everyone kind of focuses on their similarities, puts aside their differences, learns to get along. World peace in Islam is when everyone submits to the will of Allah. World peace means there's no one else to contend with. And you see that through this conquest.
Now, once they conquer Persia.
Well, Bill, if I can jump forward, because what you're showing is such a good reality that when you see what Muhammad did in his life, because I know as you do so well in the book, and actually I'm pretty sure you guys just released a DVD and MP4 where you're giving a presentation laying out so much of this, which I would encourage everybody to go on the American Minute website, purchase that, watch it. It's incredible. But I want to jump forward because I'm seeing so many parallels today. When people, for example, would look at Iran and they would go, wait a second, why is Iran funding the terrorists, right? Because people hear that, well, Islam's a religion of peace. Well, maybe for some of them, but there's some really, really bad terroristic people, and Iran's funding them. And this statement that Iran thinks America's the great Satan, and And I think it's interesting, too, there's criticism of America aligning ourselves with Israel on some level. And I think on some of that, there's maybe multiple levels of that. I think as a Christian, there are some people that are like, well, we're Galatians 3, and we think that Jews are replaced, and we're the new covenant. And there's people that are like, what Romans 11, and we're grafted in. Not to get into theological conversation, but I want to express there's layers to people's thoughts and conversation. But the reason it actually makes sense that we have a closer alliance is because there is a mutual enemy who has been dedicated to our destruction. So how did Iran go from being a really kind of freedom-oriented nation, kind of Western civilized nation, just 40, 50, 60 years ago, to becoming the greatest funder of terrorism in the world, seeking to destroy Israel and America, that ultimately led President Trump to say, you can't have a nuclear weapon. We're going to blow up that site. You're going to launch missiles at us? No, you're not. We're taking them out. How did we go there in just 40 or 50 or 60 years?
Yeah. Well, Jimmy Carter is the problem. But let me connect some dots. So Persia, because it fought the Byzantine Empire, was weakened. Muslims conquered it 634 AD. But the Persians were civilized, and the Arabs were desert wanderers. And so gradually the Persian culture moderated Islam, and it's called the Islamic Golden Age. And you had scholars like Avicenna's and Averroes and Al-Farabi that said maybe paradise is not filled full of virgins and sensual, and maybe it's more spiritual. And it was, they're studying geometry and astronomy and medicine.
Talk about how the Shah.
But then they get all slapped down by this guy named Ghazali, and he said, no, got to get fundamental, and he's a mujahideen. But then you have one of the Ismail, the Sultan called Pasha or Shah in Iran, he switches to Shiite Islam. So 15% of Muslims are Shiite, and they're mostly in Iran. 85% are Sunni, and they're scattered all around the world. Why is this important? Muhammad had a daughter, Fatima, married to a son-in-law, Ali, and they had a son named Hussein, who was, and so the followers of Ali are called Shiat Ali or Shia or Shiite. And so they're blood descendants of Muhammad. Muhammad had a general, Abu Bakr, the father of the 6-year-old that Muhammad married, and he fought with Muhammad in all the battles, and he knew the way, and so the word for the way is Sunni. And so it's basically followers of the father-in-law versus followers of the son-in-law. So one of the Sunnis killed the grandson of Muhammad, Hussein, and that started a blood feud between the Sunni and the Shiite. And so through the centuries, Turkey was Sunni and Persia was Shiite. And then the British come in with the British East India Company, and then oil's discovered, and Britain forms the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company in 1908, right? And it was better known as BP. And then the Germans get their oil from Turkey, Kirkuk, and the Berlin-Baghdad Railroad. And so half of World War I took place in the Middle East over oil. After the war, there's no more Ottoman Empire. They redraw the maps and they create the state of Israel, as well as the state of Jordan and Iraq and Lebanon and Syria. And then Persia, after World War I, gets a secular leader named Reza Shah. No more dynasties, just the same way as Ataturk in Turkey said, no more sultans. We're going to have something new called the Republic of Turkey, and we're going to be secular in Turkey. And so Shah Reza did the same thing in Iran, and women could get educated and they could wear fashions. And when World War II starts, the Shah didn't drive out Germans. And so Britain and the Soviet Union do a coup to overthrow Shah Reza and put in Mossadegh. And he's okay for a while, but in the 1950s, Mossadegh begins to side with the Soviet Union, and he nationalizes the oil industry in Iran. What does that mean? He seizes BP's oil wells, and the largest oil refinery in the world, 1953. And so Britain is having an oil shortage. They appeal to America, Eisenhower, who does Operation Ajax and overthrows Mossadegh and puts back in the son of Shah Reza, and it's Shah Reza Pahlavi. And he loves America. For 37 years, he's meeting with Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and they're building the Cadillac Seville over in Iran, and he's dressing in business suits, and he's a secular, and women can get educated. And like my son said, it looked like,
And
the 1970s in America.
You start to see how the strength of the West is part of the equation. What do I mean by that? There are surahs that will say that, that give permissions to kill the infidel, but then there are some that describe the backslidden Muslim as equal or less than an infidel, meaning that there are moderate Muslims that don't participate in the fundamental understanding. And when the West shows strength, we've seen, if you open any social media right now, you're going to see women chanting, Iranian women saying, "God bless America, God bless you soldiers, God bless President Trump." They are so excited because when you see what Al Khamenei was saying, comparing them to, it is just horrific language that he uses towards women. And then when you see that they are so excited to be liberated, you realize that the West has a part to play in this. When the West shows itself strong, the moderates who do not necessarily adhere to the fundamental understanding say, "Hey, you know what? We can kind of go hide over here. This guy's bigger, tougher. They might protect us." If we don't show ourselves, even if we show compassion is understood differently in other cultures. So this to them looks like, oh, the compassion that we think is being real friendly. To them, it's us showing our neck. It's us being weak. We need to show strength as the West, like we just did. And you see the Iranian people celebrating in the streets, celebrating here in the United States. This is the West is part of the equation, and I hope people understand that now.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too to follow that parallel. And Bill, I'm going to toss to you as soon as I say this thought, because the same people that were siding with the Palestinians, right, free Palestine, they're now saying Trump is evil for what he did. And you're like, wait a second, were the Iranian people not oppressed? Could we not say, right, we're pro-Iranian and, free Iran from the evil? And so it does show levels of hypocrisy of some of the movement in our culture, where if the argument is, well, we want to support people that are oppressed by these bad regimes, that makes sense if you're intellectually consistent. But when you're not consistent and instead you only oppose Israel and America, well, then it's far more telling that you're not motivated by your social justice movement of we want to defend the people that are being oppressed. No, you just want to oppose people you don't like. And it often happens to be Israel and America. And this certainly, Michael, to your point, when you see the Iranian people that are chanting USA and God bless America and God bless Trump, it's very revealing in the midst of a bunch of Americans on a certain political side of the aisle that are opposing Trump for doing it instead of standing in solidarity with the people that have been oppressed. Very telling.
Yeah. So now we have Jimmy Carter, and he's the president. And just like young people today on college campuses can be recruited to show up at socialist demonstrations, and they really don't know what was going on, well, the Soviets were infiltrating Iran and getting young people to protest the Shah. And they were growing in their rioting. And so Jimmy Carter's ambassador was convinced that they're going to overthrow the Shah and put in a pro-Soviet Union leader. And so Jimmy Carter, rather than coming to the Shah's defense, a video recently came up with Donald Trump way back in the 1980s saying we should have come to the Shah's defense. And even Ronald Reagan said we should have come to the Shah's defense. But instead of coming to the Shah's defense, Jimmy Carter starts corresponding with this radical Ayatollah who's been exiled in France for 15 years. And the Ayatollah tells Jimmy Carter that if Jimmy Carter lets him take over Iran, then he won't side with the Soviets and he'll keep relations with America the same. Jimmy Carter is so naive, he says, okay. So he pressures the Shah to leave in 1979, orders our military to stop supporting the Iranian pro-American military. And the Ayatollah lands his plane, comes out, and he gathers all the pro-American generals, brings them to the top of a high school and kills them, hunts down all the pro-Shah, pro-America people and kills them. And then within a month, he's saying death to America. America's the great Satan. Israel's the little Satan. And then he begins to support Hezbollah, the Hamas, and the Houthis to export. Now, the danger is Shia. So the Shia have their, Ali, Fatima have their son Hussein, but there's another son, and there's 12 bloodline descendants. And the last one was a 5-year-old that disappears from history. And the Shia, they're called Twelvers. They believe this 12th descendant, they call him the 12th Imam or the Mahdi. They think he's been hiding in a cave for 1,200 years. And if the Ayatollah can create a world war on purpose, that this 12th Imam will come out of the cave in their version of Christ, which is our version of the Antichrist, will come back and kill all the Christians and kill all the Jews and kill the little Satan Israel and the big Satan and set up a one world government that's Islamic called the Caliphate. And so where the communists have nuclear weapons, but they're not in a hurry to use them, the Ayatollah and this 12er Shiite version of Islam wants to create a world war on purpose. It's different if Iran gets these nuclear weapons because they want to use them, because in their eschatology, their end time thinking, they want to create a world war, because then this 12th kid will come out of this cave, their Antichrist will come back, and they'll set up this one world Islamic government called the Caliphate. That's why Trump...
I'm sorry, Bill, you were probably going to say exactly what I was thinking. I was just thinking, well, this makes total sense why Trump was like, we can't let them have a nuclear weapon, because the idea that they would have a nuclear weapon and not use it would be so inconsistent with their belief, because if their belief is that we have to have a world war so that we can bring in our Messiah, right? The 12th Imam and come in and be like Jesus in their mind, this Messiah that comes and rules and reigns. They're literally going to try to start a world war. And so even when people are like, well, we shouldn't have messed with Iran, that's in my mind now, that's a naive thought at best, or just an ignorant thought because you didn't know maybe some of this history, which Bill just again reminds me why, Michael, you and your dad, you guys are so important for people to understand even how we're navigating this geopolitics, which certainly understanding some of the biblical side, I just love as a Christian. It's super fun to see the Daniels and the Esthers and kind of going down, connecting all the historic dots, super fun. But then also how we navigate the area we are in becomes even more important when you understand part of what their belief is and why they didn't just want a nuclear weapon so that they would be able to have a seat at the table, a voice comparable to Russia, to China, to America, whoever else. No, they really wanted a nuclear weapon so that they could destroy probably Israel and or America, intentionally trying to start World War III to bring about their version of the end times. So this is, I think, far more dangerous than most Americans realize. And Bill, I know I cut you off. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I was just connecting the dots, which I'm sure you were connect for us. Was there anything else you were going to add before I interrupted you?
Well, that Israel is the linchpin holding back the caliphate. So both the Sunni and the Shia have a goal of a one world government. There's one group that says it's going to happen later in the distant future. And so they just want to live their lives and they're really friendly. But there's this element that when the West shows weakness, it's happening now. And so, but Israel is holding it back. So if you think of it as a crescent, you start in Turkey, you go through the Middle East and Iran, and then you come back through Egypt and North Africa, right? They want to, that's the beginning of their caliphate that used to be all Islamic, but there's a little bitty country standing in the way called Israel. And it's 9 million people surrounded by 400 million Muslims. And again, most of the Muslims would love to be moderate, but as the West would show weakness, the fundamental ones are just as happy to kill a moderate as they are to kill an infidel. And so they're sort of, but Israel is the linchpin holding back the caliphate. Mm-hmm. If Israel was gone, They could reunite the Islamic world. And if you thought Mandami being being mayor of New York was energizing to the fundamental Muslims, right? You saw the pictures of them bowing in Times Square. If Israel fell, it would energize, and all of them would think it's happening now. And we would see all the sleeper cells. We would see it would be jihad on steroids.
And it's common when you look through the history of Islam and the conquest that when they feel threatened, that's enough impetus to attack. So that's a defensive war because we felt threatened. So just going back to what we said about intention, there are some people that want to protect themselves. They want to have this military might to do so. But when you look at the intention, even what battle was it when they were miles and miles away, but they were fighting a defensive war?
I mean, here they're outside of Paris.
Yeah, thank you.
And in 100 years after Muhammad's death. And if you read the Islamic history book, they will say that every battle they fought was defensive. And you're like, you're Arabs, you're outside of Paris. How can that be defensive? Oh, well, if we feel threatened, then we're justified in attacking. It's like, it's so reverse. You read the history on our side, and it says, they came into the town, they killed all the men, and they took the women as sex slaves. You read the Islamic history, it says, we had a battle, and afterwards there were all these women and nobody to care for them. So we divided them up amongst ourselves to care for them. It's like, okay.
So basically, we wanted to just give you the glasses to put on so you can kind of see this a little differently, that checkers versus chess, the long term.
That's right. Yeah.
Well,
so it's a fascinating study.
What you are laying out is so important because we live in a culture where we are inundated with propaganda, and now we're hearing differing views from every direction. There are Christians and conservatives that are very split over multiple facets of this issue. That you have Democrats and Republicans. I mean, you can go down the list, and now we're seeing so many things online navigating what's true, what's not true. Should we believe it? Shouldn't we believe it? What you are doing is giving perspective to help us navigate. Obviously, we should be students of the Bible. We should read the Bible to gain some biblical perspective. But I am so grateful for you guys that as you are explaining history, you see where the Bible overlaps with history. And those things make a difference in understanding ideologies and worldviews. Because when you understand the worldview of Islam, right? What was Muhammad's belief? Because if you're going to be a good Muslim, you got to live like Muhammad. What did he do? How did he do it? And then that there's even different sects inside of Islam and what do they believe? But then there's a caliphate. Like, you guys are giving such good perspective. And I think this really matters for everybody who's watching and listening to be able, Michael, as you said, to have the right glasses to see what's really happening. So it's okay to have a geopolitical position. It's okay to have a Christian position, but all of our positions should be informed by truth and reality. And I think a lot of times, again, in a propaganda war, we're not always getting all of the truth, and reality gets distorted if we're tracking it on some social media app, as opposed to going, wait a second, let's go back, let's just review some basics. And you guys are some of the very best at the basics. So I want to tell everybody again, the book, What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran. If you guys can hold that up, I want everybody to see this again so that, wherever it is, there it is. That's what you're looking for. Now, guys, where is the recommended spot for them to go get that? Is this, obviously it's on Amazon, but at American Minute, do you guys have enough in stock for sale? Where do they go?
Thank you. Yes, AmericanMinute.com for everything. Bill and Michael Federer. Now, one second. There's this other book that I wanted to show you. I've actually read through it once, but I'm working on reading it again. It's just so good. You're talking about history, and we're grateful that you're saying those. But Tim, you and your father are so incredible. I told people you have to read this book because you can actually retain the history. It's a story that sticks in your mind. So anyway, I love this book. You've been so gracious mentioning our products. You have to read The American Story. That helps you see where we're at. What a phenomenon it is for us to have this opportunity to govern ourselves. That's going to help you see these threats to the Western world in a whole different light. So Thank you so much for shedding. We started with ancient history. Hopefully, we brought it up to current day. But what you need to see is that yes, we are going to need to look at what we do next. What type of leader would be aided into leadership here? I don't want to say installed, but just we need to realize that, yes, there's a lot of tumultuous stuff happening over there. We're hoping that it returns to a pro-Western region. And so I don't know if we have time to get into that, but Tim, thank you for what you're doing with history. I tell everyone all the time, it's the currency of truth. You can't understand truth until you know where you've come from. So I don't think anyone does it better than you and your father, and we're grateful to be working alongside you.
Well, yeah, I mean, we love you guys. We're so happy that we get to collaborate, and we're doing some more collaboration these days. It's so fun. But given where we are today, and again, we kind of interrupted our normal scheduled programming to have a very intentional podcast conversation to help people understand how do we process what's happening with America and Israel and Iran. And Bill, I think the book that you wrote now 2 decades ago is more relevant today maybe than when it was written, and maybe it's more relevant because not enough people read it back then. If they had, we might have navigated differently, but it's something everybody needs to find. And then as I mentioned earlier in the program, also on your website, there is a DVD, there's an MP4 of you guys actually walking through some of the history of Islam. So many great things at America Minute. Guys, normally when we have a conversation, we have a little more lighthearted interaction. So I want to get you guys back where we can hear a little bit more of your story. We can talk about some of your favorite people from American history, favorite Bible verses, whatever else. We'll have a more fun conversation hopefully later. But today I feel like it was so important for us to shed a little light to help people have perspective as we're trying to navigate this propaganda war and even understand from a biblical, historic, or constitutional perspective, what should we be doing or what shouldn't we be doing in this moment, and understanding the true nature of Islam and what every American needs to know about the Quran is so important. So guys, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today.
Yeah, we'll have to be on again to show the connection between socialism tactics of sowing division mixed with Islamic fundamentalism. So people don't understand. The PLO was started in Moscow in 1960 by the KGB, specifically for the purpose of sowing division in the Middle East. When you look at the socialist tactics, they specifically want to divide MAGA prior to the midterms so that they want the MAGA to lose, and so they can impeach Trump. So these divisive tactics are now mixed in with this Islamic fundamentalism, but that's for another interview.
Yep. To distill it into our bullet points, we need to repent as a nation. The Lord can bless us and protect us in that environment. We need to be aware of what we're up against. We want to be compassionate, but we also have to be shrewd. And then, of course, we want to lead with the gospel. Even those who oppose us, we want to give a chance for everyone to know the Lord. So we lead with the gospel, we repent as a nation, and we know what we're up against. That's what we hope to impart here.
Good word.
It's so good. I love you guys. We're definitely going to have to do it again. Bill, every time I talk to you and you're like, but wait, there's more. And I really want to hear the more. So we're definitely going to have you back on. Michael, maybe you and I will have one sometime where we can just talk about what it's like to be the sons of these guys and pick up that mantle, hopefully the Elisha mantle. So we get the double anointing, which I know that for both of our fathers, they prayed that for us. They want us to walk in that, which is so encouraging, that in the midst of a lot of people when they transition, it's hard inside of a family at times to transition. And so it's only by the grace of God that we've been able to navigate as well as we have. And of course, our dads are amazing and it makes it so much easier. But we're definitely going to have some more conversations as we go forward, God willing, and we'll get into a lot more of that. So for everybody watching, listening today, if you have questions, definitely you can reach out to any of us. You can go to AmericanMinute.com. You can contact Bill and Michael. They're also all over social media. Make sure you follow them, find out what's going on, and make sure you get informed about these topics. And they are some of the best to help give you some of that historic background understanding. Thanks for hanging out with us today on the American Story Podcast.